Alright, what's up everyone? So in this video I'm going to be outlining 3 issues that can sometimes arise when following a if it fits your macros or tracking based diet, and outline a few potential solutions that you guys can employ to sort of get around these issues. So the first problem that I see with tracking based approaches is that it can actually increase the frequency and duration of your cravings, so it can make you more food focused. So when we look at the literature on food cravings, we tend to see 2 different approaches. So the first approach is known as a control-based strategy, and the other approach is known as an acceptance-based strategy. So the control-based strategy focuses on sort of suppressing the thoughts that you have about food, and it employs specific strategies set towards reducing the frequency of those thoughts. So a simple example would just be getting rid of all of the highly palatable foods from your cupboards, or at least hiding them out of sight. Or you can set up your day with some more structure. So for example, by tracking macros or by following some sort of set meal structure, or sort of distracting yourself. So when you find the cravings starting to arise, try to divert your attention elsewhere. But then on the other hand, you also have the acceptance-based approach. And the acceptance-based approach doesn't necessarily aim to reduce the thoughts and the feelings about food per se, but rather to simply accept the fact that you do have limited control over your thoughts and feelings, and then just simply keep this in mind, all the while promoting behaviors that are consistent with your goals and values. So some examples of this would be simply practicing mindfulness meditation or mindful eating, a practice known as diffusion, which is thought of as more of like a psychological stepping back or stepping away from the feelings rather than trying to actually push the feelings or thoughts away. Somewhat paradoxically, it seems like the control-based approach tends to have a sort of reverse psychology effect, where the act of trying to suppress the thoughts or push them away actually causes you to crave the food more. It's sort of like if you see, a sign that says "Do not push, alarm will sound," you suddenly become tempted to push it or to touch the wet paint that you're not supposed to touch or whatever. And so what this has led me to think is that since tracking macros is a form of a control-based strategy, it might simply just be worse at controlling food cravings. But it's actually quite a bit more complex than that. There was one really cool study where they took 98 undergrad students and they gave them a transparent container filled with Hershey Kisses, and they told them not to eat any Hershey Kisses and to keep them on their person for the next 2 days. And anytime that they had a craving, they were to record that. And so the subjects were split up into 3 groups. One group got no intervention, so they were just given the chocolates and were told to do their own thing. Another group was given counseling on a control-based approach, so they were told things like how to distract themselves, for example, when a craving would arise. And then the third group was counseled on an acceptance-based strategy. So they were basically told that, there's no point in trying to push away your cravings or anything. Simply experience them as they are, because if you try to avoid the cravings, then that's only going to make them worse. And the subjects in this group were given a mnemonic to help them sort of remember how the approach was meant to work. So it was DAWN, which stood for distancing, acceptance, willingness, and noticing. And so what the researchers ended up finding was not that one approach was better than the other, but rather that the effectiveness of any given approach was dependent upon how the subjects felt going into the study. So the subjects who were going in with more susceptibility to their food environment, they were more sensitive to what was available to them, they tended to actually do better with an acceptance-based approach, whereas people who maybe didn't get cravings as often or weren't as sensitive to their food environment tended to do better with the control-based strategy. So I think that what this study sort of tells us is that if you're someone who tends to be really sensitive to your food environment, you tend to be really susceptible and get cravings for food, then you may actually fare better with an acceptance-based approach. So these are 2 strategies that you can use to reduce your cravings, whether you're doing intuitive eating or you're doing if it fits your macros or something else. They aren't inherent to any one method. However, what I do find is that people who do if it fits your macros are sometimes under the impression that it's going to help them with their cravings. And I think that the actual control that tracking puts on the individual can actually exacerbate this in some cases. Moving on, so number 2 is that tracking macros can actually be a healthy eating deterrent. And what I mean by that is people are discouraged to eat very healthful foods like fruits and vegetables, either because they can get away with not eating them, they can fit other foods into their macros, or more commonly I think it's just a really big pain to track. For example, if you're having a salad, there might be 5 or 6 different food items in there, and having to weigh out all of the vegetables and track those individually can just be a big nuisance. What I do and would recommend is that you set yourself up with a buffer of say 100 calories, so you can set up your macros 100 calories lower than what you would have initially planned, and then just allow yourself to eat as many vegetables as you want. Or you can simply just not track the vegetables at all and just see what happens. Vegetables are very low calorie, so you might be able to get away with that. Or you can set yourself up with some sort of requirement, so you say have to have your veggie smoothie first thing in the morning, and you just make a habit out of doing that. Or before you go to bed at night, or say with your dinner, you always have a really big salad with a ton of vegetables in it, and just build that habit so that you're not tempted to avoid eating healthy foods just because they're annoying to track or because you can fit other foods in instead. All right, and then the third problem is that when you're on a tracking-based plan, you usually feel obligated to always finish your food. I very rarely will see someone who tracks macros who doesn't finish whatever it is that they're eating completely. Whereas when you're on more of an intuitive plan, you're welcome to leave your food. You can stop eating whenever it is that you feel satiated. And so I think that while this isn't necessarily a bad thing, I find that with the intuitive approach, you can actually get ahead a little bit when it comes to progress, or you can make more progress because you can have a bigger daily deficit if you happen to, say, be very busy that day and not eat as much, or just simply have a lower appetite for that day. You're not forced to eat that food and make sure that you hit your targets by the end of the night. Now, of course, the problem can run the other way. If you're constantly under eating, then your deficit might be getting too large, and there are a host of problems that can go along with that as well. But I think that as long as you generally have a good idea of your caloric intake from day to day, if you have a day here or there where your appetite is lower or you're busier and you eat less as a result, then that's only going to expedite your progress. That isn't going to slow you down or anything. And so if you are using a tracking-based approach, I wouldn't be afraid to leave some food every now and then if you're full or if you're feeling full, or if you happen to fall behind on your macros throughout the day, then you can just leave it for the night and take that hit. And if you're feeling especially hungry the next day, then maybe you can make it up, or you can just accept that you were in a bigger deficit for that day, and that's not going to do anything detrimental over the long term. Okay guys, so those are the 3 main problems that I see people run into on a tracking-based plan. Their cravings can get higher, they can be deterred from eating healthy foods like fruits and vegetables, and they're always obligated to finish their food even when they're not hungry. And so guys, I'll just conclude this video by saying that all of this is very individual. So if you're someone who, say, is at the very end of your diet and you're preparing for a bodybuilding contest or a physique show, then you might not do as well on an approach that you might do very well on when you're in your off season or when you're just cutting for summer or whatever. So these are more or less ideas and things that you can think about when designing your own diet plan, and plug them in as you see fit according to your preferences and your own personal psychology. And that is going to conclude this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you learned something. If you like the video, do me a favor and hit the thumbs up button. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I will see you guys in the next video.